Hey, and welcome back, everybody. This is James Knight here with the Week 7 offensive rankings for IDP Plus. We just had a great Week 6 wrap up. We had a doubleheader on Monday night, two great games. Falcons upset the Bills, who lose 2 weeks in a row. Bears got a walk-off field goal for their win. Be sure to check out articles and consistency tools at Big Guy Fantasy Sports. And quick reminder, I will go through all the positions for the offensive rankings, 1 through 12, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. Stick with me. We'll be right back to go over those players. Hey, and like I just said, we are here for the offensive ranking Week 7 NFL season. We've got a couple of teams on bye this week, the Baltimore Ravens and Buffalo Bills, so don't look for those players in the rankings. They'll be not included according to that. Quick reminder, stats are based on PPR, 12-team leagues for the most part. The highlights are all from that kind of thing and are looking towards that. Any recommendations we do are mostly towards that. If you have any questions, feel free to comment on the video. Reach out to me at jkeezy on X. Send me a question. We'll talk about it. Without further ado, let's jump right into it and hit the Week 7 quarterback rankings. Last week, we were 7 of 12 that we hit on. That's pretty good. The 11th and 12th guys we had were Bo Nix and Justin Fields, and that was just an atrocious game Sunday morning over in London. No offense to be had there. The Broncos had 9 sacks, yada, yada, yada on and with that. So 7 out of 12, we did pretty good with the quarterbacks. Our fade last week was Jared Goff. He ended up as QB 18, which I think was a good call. Like I said, he wasn't at home. He was in Kansas City. Even though it should have been a high-scoring matchup, he still finished well outside of the top 12. For this week, I've got Jayden Daniels as my QB1. Him and the Washington Commanders will visit Dallas to play the Cowboys, and Jayden was QB5 last week. At QB2, I've got Patrick Mahomes for the Kansas City Chiefs at home versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Patrick was QB1 in that Sunday night matchup with the Detroit Lions this past week. Baker Mayfield is my QB3 this week for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at Detroit versus the Lions. He was QB11 last week, and he's playing MVP football. If you saw that scramble he did last week to evade pressure and get out of it and get a first down for the Bucs, that was just phenomenal. If you haven't looked it up, look that up. Check out that play from Baker Mayfield. At number 4, I've got Jared Goff for the Detroit Lions at home versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Monday night. Jared, like I said, was QB18 last week. We faded him. I'm going to give you a few reasons here in a few minutes when I come back around to this on why I like him as high as QB4 this week. At QB5, I've got Dak Prescott for the Dallas Cowboys at home versus the Washington Commanders. Dak was QB6 on the week last week. My QB6 for Week 7 is Caleb Williams. He is playing for the Chicago Bears at home versus the New Orleans Saints. We saw the Bears come back and get that field goal win in dramatic fashion against the Commanders on Monday night. The offense started clicking. DeAndre Swift ran for over 100 yards. I'll give you a few more reasons on why I really like Caleb Williams all the way up as high as 6 here in a few minutes. And he was QB10 this past week. My QB7 this week is Jalen Hurts. Philadelphia Eagles on the road at Minnesota. I know a lot of things are going wrong with the Eagles, but I can't drop Jalen much lower than this. I like him at QB7. He was QB8 last week, so I like him at QB7 this week. My hot riser, and he's been one of the guys I've been in on all year, is Drake Maye at QB8. Him and the New England Patriots are visiting Tennessee to face the Titans. Drake finished as QB2 just this past week. At QB9, I've got Justin Herbert for the Los Angeles Chargers at home versus the Indianapolis Colts. Justin was QB14 last week. We saw Kamani Vidal feeling pretty good for Amari Hampton and Najee Harris, that whole missing running back piece. But I think they're still going to keep slinging it, rely on Herbert, and he's still running. I like him as QB9 this week. My QB10, another up-and-comer on that trio of sophomore quarterbacks that I love, Caleb Williams, Drake Maye, and it's Bo Nix at QB10. Like I said, terrible game versus the Giants. This is a great bounce-back spot for Bo Nix at home versus the New York Giants. He was QB21 last week despite the terrible conditions and the just play between both offenses in that Jets-Broncos game. My QB11 this week is Matthew Stafford for the Los Angeles Rams playing in Jacksonville versus the Jaguars. Stafford fell all the way down to QB26 last week, and it looks like he'll be without Puka this week, but I think he rebounds here against Jacksonville and is QB11 for me this week. QB12, Daniel Indiana Jones. I'm just going to keep saying that nickname because I love it. Him and the Indianapolis Colts are going to travel to LA to face the Chargers. And I think Herbert and Jones duel a little bit. Daniel Jones was QB4 last week. He's put up some big points this year, and I like him as my QB12 to round out the top 12 quarterbacks for week 7. As I mentioned, buys for the Ravens and the Bills this week. So we've got Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, 2 top-notch quarterbacks out. Lamar Jackson was probably going to miss this week anyway if they were playing from injury, but we expect him to possibly be back next week. A couple other injuries to watch at the quarterback position. You got Brock Purdy, who is questionable. They're going to hold out, and hopefully he can practice on Wednesday. Kyler Murray is questionable. J.J. McCarthy has even been bumped up to possibly questionable as well. He's got the Q status beside of him. We know Joe Burrow is still out, so plan accordingly if you've got those guys and try to figure something out at quarterback. If, by chance, you're playing this guy, I'm fading him this week. Jacksonville Jaguars quarterback Trevor Lawrence. He is at home. Decent, plays decent at home. The team seems to be coming around. Brian Thomas Jr. showed some life last week, but they are going to be in London as the home team. So it's versus the LA Rams. It's the early morning game, so these games are usually sluggish as is. We saw what happened last week with the Broncos and the Jets, and we've seen it almost every week when it's those early games. The Rams give up the 11th fewest points to quarterbacks and are tied for 3rd in the NFL in sacks with 19. So T-Law, he only has a 78.2 passer rating when facing pressure. That's not good. So I've got Trevor Lawrence faded outside of my top 12 this week. He finished his QB 13 last week, but I don't think he sniffs that this week in London versus the Rams. All right, let's go ahead and move on here to the running backs and what our top 12 and what we did last week and what the top 12 for this week 7 of the NFL season looks like. We were 6 of 12 again. Like I said, that's pretty good. I mean, we're running average here, so we hit on 6 of 12. I said to fade Derrick Henry. It wasn't bad. He fell outside of the top 12 running backs just barely at RB13, despite a top 5 ranking in most rankings last week. He did that without Lamar Jackson, had a pretty good game, but didn't punch one in, fell out of the top 12, so I feel pretty good about fading him last week. As far as this week, RB1, he's a staple. It's Christian McCaffrey, CMC, for the 49ers at home versus Atlanta Sunday night. McCaffrey was RB7 last week, and any given week he can put up, 200 yards, total scrimmage yards, and multiple touchdowns. He stays at RB1. RB2, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions at home versus Tampa Bay Monday night. He was running back 32 last week, so he fell off. That was pretty rough against the Chiefs. Chiefs did a great job of keeping him out of the game plan. That won't happen versus Tampa Bay at home for Detroit. Gibbs is going to get involved, and I like him as RB2. My RB3 this week is Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts visiting the Los Angeles Chargers. Jonathan Taylor was RB8 last week. Don't need to say much else about him. He's been a monster all season. RB4 for this week is Quinshon Judkins versus Miami. He is was RB51 last week, and Miami gives up the 5th most points to running backs. They're terrible against the run. Judkins, he has an 80% clutch rate this year, which if you watched my show last week, you touched on that. That means he had a consistent clutch game in 80% of his games so far played this year. He's had at least 12 touches in every game. And at home this year, Judkins is averaging 102 rushing yards. And like I said, Judkins is against a terrible, terrible Miami team against the run, and he's at home in Cleveland. So I like Judkins as my RB4 this week. And I will go back and touch base real quick because I realized I did. I kind of sped through some of this stuff and didn't go back on why I like Jared Goff and Caleb Williams earlier. So if you were paying attention to the quarterbacks here, and I said that I like Jared Goff higher than consensus versus Tampa Bay at home in Detroit, it's a Monday night primetime game. Tampa Bay gives up the 6th most points, fantasy points, to quarterbacks. Also, it's at home. We talked about this. Splits at home versus the road for Jared Goff are a huge play for him. He averages 26.35 points at home compared to only 17.85 on the road. This game carries an over-under of 53 from Vegas. It's the 2nd highest total so far of the week, behind only the Washington-Dallas game, which is at 54.5. So I like Jared Goff as my QB4. My QB6 that I like, and I like higher than consensus, like I said, part of that trio that I love of those sophomores or second-year passers coming in this year, Caleb Williams, Chicago Bears, at home versus the Saints. New Orleans gives up the ninth most fantasy points to quarterbacks. The Bears, as I mentioned briefly and when I went past him, they found their running game last week. DeAndre Swift hit 100 yards. Burden is developing. Colston Loveland is developing. We see rookies always take a step forward after the bye week. This past week, we see that kind of happening in Chicago. They've got a really good game plan. Caleb will continue to climb these QB rankings, and I think he's going to be a top 5 quarterback rest of the way. You look at his games, he's had 5 games played this year. He's had at least 2+ touchdowns in 4 of those 5. So really like him as QB6 here. All right. And I'm going to go back. I'll jump right back into where we were at on the running backs. We had already touched RB1 was CMC, Christian McCaffrey. RB2 was Jahmyr Gibbs. RB3, Jonathan Taylor. RB4, Quinshon Judkins. And then I'm going to go to RB5 here, Josh Jacobs. Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, not Las Vegas. Oh, wow. I keep thinking about him being a Raider. It's even better. Green Bay Packers at Arizona versus the Cardinals. Jacobs was RB3. He's the main man there. He gets all the touches. You know, the only thing he comes out for is breathers for Emmanuel Wilson, and I don't think that changes anytime soon. I like Jacobs as RB5. RB6, and this kind of feels blasphemous after the doubleheader game that he just blew up on Buffalo there. Bijan Robinson, who had well over 230 scrimmage yards, destroyed the Buffalo Bills. I like him as RB6 this week. He's at San Francisco facing the 49ers on Sunday night. And as I mentioned, he was RB1 this past week. It just blew up. So I like him as RB6. My RB7 this week is the Miami Dolphins' Devon Achane. They're visiting Cleveland for the Browns. The Browns have a pretty tough defense, but Achane can do it through the air and the ground, so I like him as my RB7. He was RB4 this past week. My RB8 for the week is Breece Hall of the New York Jets, involved in that ugly massacre of a game. Like I said, Broncos and Jets. Go Broncos. They got the win. I'm really happy about that, but I'll take a win. But, man, that was rough offensively. Breece Hall for the Jets is at home versus the Carolina Panthers. Carolina Panthers have been notoriously bad against the run this year. They struggle, and running backs kind of have their way with them. Breece Hall is another one of those dual threat backs. He can do it on the ground or in the air. I think the Jets are hitting panic mode. We're going to see Breece Hall probably get some more usage here and see what they can get out of him. He was only RB37 in that Broncos-Jets game, but I see him climbing up. I got him at RB8 for this week. At RB9 is Saquon Barkley, running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. And, it's going to be more of the same for them. I really like the Eagles. I think they've got a lot going for them for Saquon Barkley. I know they've got some internal issues with A.J. Brown and whatnot from all that. And Barkley this past week was tied for RB23, so not really, blowing up. Like I said, there's some issues there, but they are going to be at Minnesota, playing the Vikings. So I think Barkley has some success there this week. I've got him as RB9. My RB10 this week, Kyren Williams, Los Angeles Rams. It's the London game. Jacksonville's technically the home team, but it's the London morning game. Sluggish game. Kyren Williams, pencil him in for a touchdown, pencil him in for 20 touches and 90 yards or whatever you want to do. He's my RB10 this week. He was RB11 last week. He just keeps chugging along. I think Blake Corum the week before last, this past week, he had a fumble and a drop pass, and man, that shot all hopes where he seemed like he was climbing up a little bit, taking some carries from Williams. Sean McVay doesn't want any of that. He's got Kyren as his top dog, and I got him at RB10 this week. My RB11 this week is Jaylen Warren from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He just came back last week from a knee injury and was RB29. Gainwell got some of the passing downs, but the Steelers travel to Cincinnati, play the Bengals this week. Cincinnati gives up the most points to fantasy running backs. This is a divisional game, and Warren, like I said, is in his second game back from the knee injury. I think it's going to be a ground pound game for Pittsburgh. They're going to let Warren control it in between the 20s and do a lot of stuff. And if somebody punches a touchdown in, I'll bet it'll be him. He's averaging 13.5 points a game on the road this season, and he's got a 75% clutch rate on the year. So 75% of his games have been consistently clutch. So I like him as my RB11 this week. My RB12 for this week is Ashton Jeanty for the Las Vegas Raiders at Kansas City. He was the RB12 last week. He's their main focal point on offense. Brock Bowers is out. He looks like he's going to be out again. Jacoby Myers hasn't done a whole lot. I like Jeanty on volume alone to crack the RB12 top spots. and I like him as my RB12 this week. As I mentioned, the Bills and the Ravens are on bye, so James Cook, Derrick Henry, both missing this week. You'd probably see them somewhere in that vicinity up there in the top this week. They would have been in the top 12 floating around there, but like I said, on bye, so make sure you pay attention to that. And, of course, some injuries that you got to pay attention to at the running back position. Omarion Hampton, like we said, is already ruled out. He'll be out for a while. Kamani Vidal seemed to take the lead role there over Hassan Haskins, so keep an eye on that. Trey Benson is out, and it appears, Amari DiMercato is questionable there. It looked like Bam Knight leapfrogged Michael Carter last week, so kind of keep an eye on that and see how that's going. Bucky Irving is listed as doubtful, so he's probably going to be out, so it'll be the Rachaad White show in Tampa Bay for them. And Chuba Hubbard is questionable, which does he come back to a job with Rico Dowdle having back-to-back 230-plus scrimmage yard weeks? I don't know. We'll see how that works out this week, and we need to pay attention. Hubbard may not even be back. Like I said, he's listed as questionable right now. Speaking of questionable running back that a lot of people drafted, probably top 12, top 15, Kenneth Walker III for the Seattle Seahawks. They're at home this week versus Houston, and I'm fading him this week. I keep looking at it, and I want Walker, and I wanted him. I felt like he was falling to me in drafts, felt really good about it, but it has been so tough to watch. He gets Houston this week, as we said. They give up the 9th fewest fantasy points to running backs, and not to mention that, Walker continues to cede touches to Zach Charbonnet. And, I mean, Walker's only gotten 11 touches the last 2 weeks. Each week, 11 touches. That's it. He scored less than 10 points in 3 of his 6 games played this year. I'm fading him. I don't think he sniffs the top 12 this week. And if he does, it would probably be because Charbonnet gets injured. I hope that doesn't happen. So I'm fading Kenneth Walker III this week. Let's move on to wide receivers for the week 7 of the NFL season here moving forward. Injuries really, really, really just punched us in the gut this past week, and we only got 4 out of 12. I mean, Puka went down, Emeka Egbuka went down, Marvin Harrison Jr. went down. The list goes on and on and on. And then, not to mention that, it was just a putrid week, if you will, I guess, for me calling wide receivers. I said to fade George Pickens. That was not good. George Pickens finished tied for the wide receiver 1. Him and Drake London, I believe it was, tied for wide receiver 1. Yeah, to Drake London. I thought J.C. Horn was going to shadow Pickens and kind of help shut him down and do that. Horn did not shadow Pickens, and Pickens made the Panthers pay. So that was not a good fade, but we'll move on to this week and see what we've got. My number 1 this week, and you're going to have to pay attention to this, it's an injury report. I've heard good things so far, but we need to see how Wednesday practice and the rest of the week goes out. I've got CeeDee Lamb for the Dallas Cowboys at home versus the Washington Commanders. He's my wide receiver 1 this week. My wide receiver 2, same thing, questionable. At Jacksonville, it's the London game, supposedly a Jaguars home game, but it's in London Sunday morning. Puka Nacua for the Rams is my wide receiver 2. He fell all the way to wide receiver 66, but if he can play, I like him at wide receiver 2 this week. My wide receiver 3 this week, and he just seems to have locked his place in that top 3, is Jackson Smith-Njigba for the Seattle Seahawks. He is at home versus the Houston Texans on a Monday night game. So like I said, he's locked in. He's my wide receiver 3 this week. I had him at wide receiver 3 last week, and he finished at wide receiver 3 last week. So let's just keep that trend going, JSN. At number 4, huge guy here. He's showing that he can do it with anybody. He did it with Browning the week prior. He did it last week with Flacco. They hooked up. It's Ja'Marr Chase for the Cincinnati Bengals at home versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll get to see them Thursday night where the two quarterbacks, I think, combined age is like 82, 81. So you got Aaron Rodgers and Joe Flacco both on the other side of 40 playing in that game. So that'll be the Thursday night game, Cleveland versus Pitt. I like Ja'Marr Chase as my wide receiver 4. He finished wide receiver 5 last week. At wide receiver 5, I've got Drake London, Atlanta Falcons, traveling to San Francisco to play the 49ers. This is the Sunday night game, another primetime. We know London's not afraid of primetime. Him and Bijan Robinson put on an absolute show to destroy Buffalo this past week on Monday night, and he was tied for wide receiver 1 with George Pickens. My wide receiver 6 for this week, can't put him any lower. Love him. He was on bye last week, but I think he's going to come back this week to a dysfunctional Eagles team that has a bad secondary that he gets to play at home in Minnesota. It's Justin Jefferson. I wouldn't be shocked if he puts on a bigger show than this. Coming off a bye, he's probably going to be better healthy than he has been in the last couple of weeks. Him and Wentz will probably have a little bit more of a connection. If not, McCarthy may be back. But either way, I like Jefferson as my wide receiver 6. My wide receiver 7 for this week is Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions at home versus Tampa Bay Monday night. Amon-Ra was wide receiver 20 last week, and that's pretty low for him. That was in a road game against Kansas City. Like I said, Lions are at home. That's a full green light. Start your Lions. These guys are going to put up points. Probably a huge shootout game in Detroit versus Tampa Bay. My wide receiver 8 for this week 7 coming up is Deebo Samuel for the Washington Commanders at Dallas. He was wide receiver 60 last week, but that's okay. Dallas gives up the most fantasy points to wide receivers. So I think Samuel's going to do some damage there. He was also nursing a heel injury this past week, wasn't at 100%. I think, if he can get closer to 100% this week, he'll have a much better matchup against Dallas. He also has a 67% clutch rate on the year. So, like I said, consistent in 2/3 of his games, moving through the season so far. And it's a divisional matchup. I think if they can get McLaurin back, if they can get Noah Brown, somebody else back to kind of help even out the offense a little bit, get Deebo doing the things that he's good at, I like him as wide receiver 8 this week. At wide receiver 9, I've got Ladd McConkey for the Los Angeles Chargers at home versus the Indianapolis Colts. Ladd was tied for wide receiver 6 last week, had a pretty big game. Quinton Johnston was out there. We need to keep an eye on that, but we know McConkey's capable. We saw what he did last season. I like him as wide receiver 9 this week. My wide receiver 10 this week is Nico Collins of the Houston Texans at Seattle to face the Seahawks. Nico was on bye with the Texans last week. They had an extra week to prepare to play the Seahawks. We know that offense looked good as they scored over 70-plus points over the previous 2 weeks before the bye. Houston's looking a lot better. C.J. Stroud's looking a lot better, and Nico is the number 1 receiver there. I like him as wide receiver 10 this week. My wide receiver 11, he's coming back off of injury, but just in the nick of time. It's Mike Evans for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He'll be at Detroit facing the Lions. Now, the reason I say that this is just in the nick of time is Godwin's a little banged up. He may miss some time here. We know that Mika Egbuka is banged up. He could miss a week, if not more. But Evans is questionable. Looks like they're trying to get him a full practice this week. He'll have until Monday night to get ready for the game. I like him as my wide receiver 11. My wide receiver 12 this week is Stephon Diggs of the New England Patriots, traveling to Tennessee to face the Titans. He was wide receiver 55 last week as he fell behind Kayshon Boutte, who seems to be a hot waiver wire pickup, but that's a deep ball threat. It's a hit or miss type of thing, and I like Stephon Diggs to continue to be the target earner in this offense as Drake May continues to grow. Tennessee gives up the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers, and Diggs already has a 50% clutch rate on the year. He's 3 out of 6 games with 6+ receptions. So when the targets are there and they're actually playing and not just hitting the deep ball like they did this past week, I think Diggs is good for 6-7 recs, 80 yards, and I think he finds the end zone for the first time, his first touchdown this week. Let's go over a couple of injuries that I already touched base on a little bit there. Emeka Egbuka listed as questionable. There's a good chance he's not going to play. Mike Evans is questionable. They're thinking he's going to get a full practice in. CeeDee Lamb, questionable. They're hoping he's going to play. They're looking forward to that. Puka Nacua is on the other side of that. He is listed as questionable but may miss this week. Marvin Harrison Jr. is questionable. Jawan Jennings is questionable with apparently 5 fractured ribs, a high ankle sprain, a low ankle sprain, all kinds of things going on with him. Ricky Pearsall, probably the same type of thing. It feels like the 49ers have every kind of ailment you can possibly think of. Terry McLaurin, questionable. DJ Moore, questionable, who visited the hospital after the Monday night games, stayed in Washington and visited the hospital there. He has cleared the hospital. It apparently was a groin injury, but he's back in Chicago with the team now, so he's listed as questionable. Quinton Johnston, as I touched on in the McConkey spot there, he's listed as questionable too. Keep an eye on all those guys. Let's see how the practice reports and things shake out this week. Wednesday, keep in mind, could be veteran days off, so try to keep an eye on that Thursday practice, see how Thursday, Friday works out. If they're missing a Thursday, Friday, there's a high-end chance they're not playing on Sunday. My big fade this week, and like I said, this whole team has been back and forth. The Philadelphia Eagles are just kind of freaking me out. I can't figure out what's going on with them. They were Super Bowl winners. Now we have them and the Buffalo Bills losing back-to-back weeks when those were the two last undefeated teams in the league. I've got A.J. Brown this week as my fade at Minnesota. He was wide receiver 19 last week, but Minnesota gives up the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. And, I mean, they're having all kinds of problems. Brown is kind of, I'm not going to say back to his diva ways, but we've seen some social media posts and some weird things going on. Not to mention the picture of what, I don't know exactly how it happened there, but it looked like he was mugging Devonta Smith in the end zone to try to catch up that end-of-game pass. I don't think Minnesota is a get-right game for him. A.J. Brown, he only has a 33% clutch rate on the year, so that's not good. And with all the drama and all the things happening there, I don't think Minnesota, a place where wide receivers go to not score points, is going to be a place that he's going to break out. I've got him firmly outside of my top 12 this week, and I'm fading him. Moving on to tight ends, this past week, we did pick 12 last week. We had Dalton Kincaid at number 12. If you paid attention to the Monday night games, Kincaid was ruled out, didn't even get to play in the game. So we were actually 6 of 11 minus Kincaid. That's pretty good, not too bad. Laporta came through as the tight end 4 this past week. He surprisingly led the Lions in their receiving group, and not to mention he had an amazing toe-tap touchdown in the back of the end zone. Haven't seen that highlight. You should look it up. Pretty amazing catch, but that propelled him all the way up to tight end 4. So fading him was not a good idea. Fading most of the other Lions was a good idea, but not Laporta. This week for my tight end 1, it's the fixture. Trey McBride right now is proven to be trustworthy. He's my tight end 1 at home for the Cardinals versus Green Bay. He had a good week last week, finished tight end 2, even with Jacoby Brissett starting at quarterback instead of Kyler Murray. I like him as my tight end 1. My tight end 2 this week I faded him last week, so I've got him bumped up here. It's Sam Laporta. I told you. The Detroit Lions are at home versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a Monday night primetime game. Like it to be a big scoring affair. The Lions put up points at home. Like Sam Laporta is my tight end 2. My tight end 3 is Tucker Kraft for the Green Bay Packers at Arizona versus the Cardinals. He was tied for tight end 10 this past week, and the Cardinals give up the 6th most points to fantasy tight ends. This season, Tucker Kraft has either a touchdown and or 3 receptions in every game he's played. He has a 60% clutch rate and averages 12-plus points per game against bad defenses versus the tight end. As I just said, Arizona gives up the 6th most points to tight ends. I would imagine Kraft minimum floor here is 10 to 12 points, and he could have a monster game. I've got him as tight end 3. My tight end 4 this week, another lock in the top up there that I just really, really like, Tyler Warren, the rookie tight end from Indianapolis. He is going to L.A. to face the Chargers. He was tight end 4 last week. He's a lock for tight end, top 5 tight end. Him and Daniel Jones seem to have a connection, and he's just commanding targets in that offense. My tight end 5 this week, it's the good old natural. He keeps chugging along. It's Travis Kelce. He's not the tight end 1 that he used to be, but he is consistently top 10, top 12 this year. He was tight end 9 last week. I like him this week at home versus the Raiders. If you track his career, he has owned the Raiders pretty much throughout his entire career, averaging like over 80-plus yards in that series, and I think he probably does that again this week. I got him at tight end 5. Tight end 6, speaking of turning the clock back, is Darren Waller, who is the tight end for the Miami Dolphins right now starting. And talk about another dysfunctional team. Tua came out and said they're missing team meetings, doing all kinds of stuff, showing up late, doing things. Doesn't matter. Darren Waller keeps on chugging along. He is the tight end starting for Miami this week at Cleveland, which I think Cleveland will do a good job trying to put the clamps on some receivers, do some other things. Darren Waller probably gets several passes out in the flats in the short game. I like him as tight end 6 this week. My tight end 7 this week, and going back to the well despite the massacre of the Denver-New York Jet game, I'm taking Mason Taylor, the rookie tight end from the New York Jets. This week, he's at home versus the Carolina Panthers. Carolina gives up the 2nd most points to fantasy tight ends. And despite the fact that Taylor had an ugly game last week, the Jets only threw the ball 17 times. 9 completions for Justin Fields. I think that's going to get better. Prior to that game Sunday morning in London, Taylor had 2 consecutive clutch games, and I think he gets back on track against Carolina, who gives up, like I said, the 2nd most fantasy points to tight end. I like Mason Taylor as tight end 7 this week. My tight end 8 this week is Dallas Goedert for the Philadelphia Eagles, who traveled to Minnesota to play the Vikings. Dallas was tight end 1 last week. He is one of the only tight ends that we've got who is still 100% consistent. He hasn't played every game, but because he did miss week 2, but Goddard has had a consistently clutch game in every game he's played. I like him as tight end 8 this week. My tight end 9 is kind of an iffy thing. I think you can play him no matter what as a top 12 tight end, but I like him up as high as 9. Harold Fannin Jr. of the Cleveland Browns. They're at home versus the Miami Dolphins. Like I said, that Dolphins team their defense is just terrible. Fannin Jr. was tight end 7 last week, and Njoku got banged up, so keep an eye on that. If Njoku was out, Fannin Jr. is 100% a top 10 tight end this week. I like him against Miami. I like the rapport that him and Dylan Gabriel seem to show together. They seem to have some magic. At my tight end 10 this week is Jake Ferguson, Dallas Cowboys versus the Washington Commanders. It's at home in Dallas. Ferguson was tied for tight end 10 last week. He still seems to be getting a ton of targets. And like I said, Lamb could be back this week. Pickens, has already been doing his thing. I still think there's a very, very narrow receiving tree here. Ferguson, if he keeps the volume of what he's doing in the short game where they keep using Pickens and Lamb to kill people down the field, I think Ferguson will stay in the top 10, top 12. I like him at tight end 10 this week. My tight end 11 is TJ Hockenson for the Minnesota Vikings at home versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Hockenson was on bye last week, so he didn't have a finish, but we know that team is getting healthier, and they got Jordan Addison back from suspension. We don't know whether it'll be Wentz or McCarthy, but with Jefferson, Addison, Hockenson, and Thielen all in the fold, I like Hockenson sneakily to find some mismatches. I like him in the top 12. I like him as tight end 11. My tight end 12 is Zach Ertz. He found the end zone this past Monday, and I like him this week at Dallas. He was the tight end 5 this past week. I like him as tight end 12 this week. He's still the safety blanket for Jayden Daniels, if you will. And McLaurin could be out. Noah Brown could be out. They both missed this past week. Deebo Samuel, hopefully back from that heel injury. That's why we like him in the top 12 wide receivers. But I like Ertz in the top 12 as a tight end 12 this week. And sticking with it, we know the buys this week. Again, Buffalo Bills, Baltimore Ravens. So we got Dalton Kincaid out, Dawson Knox if you were having to use him, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely both out for the Ravens as well on bye this week. So make adjustments in your lineup for that. Injuries, George Kittle still out, hasn't come back. Brenton Strange, Jaguars tight end, done for the year. Brock Bowers is questionable. However, we do have a quote from Pete Carroll saying, we think the smart thing to do is to sit him this week for the long run. So probably won't see Bowers. David Njoku, banged up like I said. Check the injury report for Cleveland. If he's out, look for Harold Fannin Jr. and see what you can do there. My fade at tight end this week, and it's kind of because I'm in on Stephon Diggs. I also, Kayshon Boutte had some deep plays, but I think that was kind of one of those things, a boom or bust type thing we're going to see with Boutte. I don't think we're going to see him get a lot of targets each week, but if he does connect, he'll have some good weeks. Hunter Henry, him and the Patriots are visiting Tennessee to play the Titans. I don't think they're going to have to put up a ton of points. And, Tennessee gives up the 9th fewest fantasy points to tight ends across the board. And technically speaking, Henry has taken kind of a backseat to Diggs on the actual moving the chains and being that type of receiver. And then Kayshon Boutte is obviously the deep threat in that. So I think Henry is kind of taking a third seat in that pecking order, which we want him to be in the top 2 in, receiving and targets for his team in order for him to be a top 12 tight end. I just, basically Henry's gotten 9 targets over the last 3 weeks combined. He has a 50% clutch rate and back-to-back non-clutch games over the last 2 weeks. As we see him kind of fade out, he'll probably be touchdown dependent in most weeks, and I've got him not inside my top 12. I've got him well outside of that, probably tight end 2021, somewhere in that vicinity this week. And guys, that wraps it up for our Week 7 offensive rankings here for IDP Plus. Like I said, go through, check out the top 12 at each spot I've got. I have several guys I like higher than consensus. You can compare those to some rankings across the board. Let's take a look and see where everybody finishes. If they match up with my rankings, what do you think? Who are you high on? Who are you low on? Who are you fading? Who won't you touch with a 10-foot pole? I get it. We're moving on to Week 7 here. There's a lot of 2 and 4 teams, a lot of 3 and 3 teams. We're trying to figure this stuff out, and I'm here to help you figure that out together. I'd love to see you back next week, and in between then, check out all the great stuff we have over at IDP Plus and at Big Guy Fantasy Sports, and check me out on X at JKeasy, JKEASY. Shoot me a follow, send me some questions, let's talk football, do whatever you want to do. And hey, Good luck on waivers this week. Good luck this week in fantasy football. And hey, we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.